I thought I knew who I was. A father, a visitor, a man just passing through. But one university visit, one conversation, one woman I was never supposed to notice. Changed everything, quietly, permanently, and without witnesses. This is my story. I only came to visit my school daughter, but what happened changed everything. I told myself it was just a visit. That was the lie I carried with me as the car rolled through the university gates, tires humming softly against the paved road, my hands steady on the wheel even though my chest felt tight. I hadn't been here in years. Universities always smelled the same to me, fresh grass, concrete warming under the sun, and something else that hovered in the air like possibility mixed with recklessness. I was here for my daughter. That was the truth, or at least the version of it I was comfortable saying out loud. She was finishing her final year. Too busy, she'd said. Exams, projects, life. But there was a distance in her voice the last time we spoke, the kind that creeps in quietly and then settles like dust you don't notice until the room feels unfamiliar. I wanted to see her face. Make sure she was alright. Reassure myself that whatever distance existed between us was just time doing what time always does. I parked near the faculty housing, turned off the engine, and sat there longer than necessary. I had no idea that the real reason everything would change had nothing to do with my daughter at all. The first time I saw her, it was unremarkable. That's the part people never believe when I tell the story, when I tell it carefully, without details that would give too much away. They expect lightning, drama, something cinematic. Instead, she was standing near the administrative building, arguing softly into her phone, sunlight catching the edge of her hair. She looked annoyed more than upset. One heel lifted impatiently, her free hand gesturing as if the person on the other end could see her frustration. I noticed her the way you notice a stranger twice, once without thought, and then again because something about them refuses to be ignored. She wasn't young in the way students are young. That distinction mattered to me immediately. She carried herself differently. There was a quiet authority in her posture, the kind that comes from responsibility and routine, not rebellion. A faculty badge hung from her bag. Married, I would later learn. Comfortably so, or so it appeared. I didn't know any of that then. I just knew that when she ended the call and exhaled, her eyes briefly met mine, and neither of us looked away fast enough. My daughter was late. That should have been a relief. It gave me time to wander, to stretch my legs, to pretend I wasn't suddenly aware of how long it had been since I'd felt seen. I walked past lecture halls, student cafes, bulletin boards layered with ambition and chaos. It felt strange being on the other side of life now, not chasing grades, not falling recklessly in love, but watching it happen all around me like a spectator who once played the game. That's when I saw her again. She was seated outside a small faculty cafe, laptop open, fingers moving with practiced ease. A wedding ring caught the light as she lifted her cup. That should have been my cue to stop noticing her altogether. Instead, it anchored her in my mind. Married people don't flirt with strangers. Sensible men don't imagine lives they have no right to touch. Fathers visiting the daughters don't let their thoughts drift. I broke all 3 rules before the afternoon ended. She spoke to me first. That matters. I've replayed it enough times to be certain. I was standing near the counter, waiting for my order, when she glanced up from her screen and said, "You look lost." It wasn't rude. It wasn't suggestive. Just observant. I am, I admitted. First time here in years. She smiled at that. A small, knowing smile. That explains it. The campus keeps changing. People don't. That should have been the end of it. A polite exchange. 2 strangers passing through each other's days. But conversation has a way of unfolding when neither person rushes to fold it back up. She asked who I was visiting. I told her my daughter studied here. She nodded, asked what course. Listened when I answered. Really listened, not the way people do out of courtesy, but with genuine attention. I asked what she taught. Her answer surprised me. It wasn't the subject, it was the passion behind it. Her voice softened when she spoke about her students, about shaping minds instead of just grading papers. There was pride there, fulfillment, and something else underneath it that I didn't yet have language for. Longing, maybe, or restlessness. When my daughter finally arrived, breathless and apologetic, I felt an irrational flicker of disappointment. I introduced them. They shook hands. Her grip was warm, confident. My daughter liked her immediately, commented on her shoes, asked about her department, laughed easily in a way that reminded me how quickly young people trust. We all sat together for a while. Nothing inappropriate happened. That part matters, too. But awareness doesn't need action to become dangerous. I watched how she spoke to my daughter, encouraging, respectful, invested. I watched how my daughter responded, how admiration lit her face. I felt something shift quietly inside me, something that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with inevitability. When she excused herself for a meeting, I noticed the faint hesitation before she stood. The way her eyes met mine again, longer this time, searching, as if asking a question neither of us was ready to hear spoken aloud. That evening, alone in my hotel room, I thought about her more than I should have. I justified it easily. Harmless curiosity. Human nature. She was married. I was just visiting. Our lives ran parallel for a moment and would never intersect again. I believed that lie right up until the next morning. The university called me back. My daughter had forgotten some documents in my car the day before. I offered to drop them off. I didn't tell myself I hoped I'd see her again. I didn't have to. She was in her office this time. The space reflected her, orderly, warm, personal without being intimate. Books neatly arranged, framed photos turned slightly inward, as if meant more for memory than display. One picture, face down, caught my attention. I didn't ask about it. She closed the door behind me. That detail would matter later. We talked longer than necessary. About teaching, about parenting, about marriage, though neither of us said the word directly. There were pauses in the conversation that felt weighted, heavy with unsaid things. When she laughed, it wasn't polite anymore. It was unguarded. When she looked at me, she didn't pretend not to notice the way I looked back. Still, nothing happened. Not yet. But when I left her office, heart pounding, hands slightly unsteady, I understood something with unsettling clarity. I hadn't come to visit my daughter anymore. I had crossed an invisible line, not with my body, but with my mind. And once that happens, the rest is only a matter of time. Lines that don't exist until you step over them. I spent the rest of that day pretending to be present. I listened when my daughter talked about her plans after graduation. I nodded in the right places. I smiled when she teased me for looking distracted. But my mind kept slipping, back to a quiet office with a closed door, to the sound of a woman's laughter that had stayed with me longer than it should have. That night, I walked the campus alone. Universities are strange after dark. The noise thins out, the bravado fades. What remains feels more honest, footsteps echoing, distant music drifting from open windows, conversations murmured instead of announced. It felt intimate in a way daylight never allows. I told myself I was walking to clear my head. Instead, I walked past her building. Her office light was off. That should have ended it. The next morning, I received an email. It was brief, professional, thoughtful. She thanked me for the documents I'd returned for my daughter and mentioned a resource she thought might help with one of her projects. That was all. No invitation. No subtext. No reason to read more into it. I read it 3 times anyway. Then I replied. That mattered more than I admitted to myself. Conversation unfolded easily after that. Emails first, then brief encounters on campus that felt accidental even though neither of us was surprised anymore. There was always someone else nearby. Students, colleagues, my daughter, once. Nothing that crossed a visible line. But lines aren't always visible. They live in tone, in timing, in the way two people choose each other's company when they don't need to. She never spoke about her husband directly. I never asked. That silence felt intentional, a mutual agreement not to bring reality too close, not to let it break the fragile world we were building one careful interaction at a time. One afternoon, she invited me to sit with her while she graded papers. I work better with someone else in the room, she said lightly. I didn't ask why. Her office door stayed open this time. That detail mattered too. We didn't talk much. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was charged, not with lust, not yet, but with awareness. Every movement felt amplified, the scratch of her pen, the soft exhale when she leaned back, the way her sleeve brushed my arm when she reached for a book. I could feel myself becoming someone else in that room, not a father, not a visitor, not even a man with a defined role. Just a presence she had chosen to allow close. That choice thrilled and unsettled me in equal measure. The first time our conversation turned personal, it wasn't intentional. She was tired that day. I could hear it in her voice before she admitted it. The academic confidence she wore so well slipped just enough to reveal something human underneath. "Do you ever feel," she asked, eyes on her desk rather than on me, "like your life is perfectly arranged, and still somehow unfinished?" The question hung between us, heavy and dangerous. "Yes," I said quietly. "More often than I like." She nodded, didn't smile. That was the moment intimacy truly began, not with touch, but with recognition. I noticed then how careful she was with herself. The way she measured her words. The way she straightened her ring unconsciously when the conversation drifted too close to something emotional. The way she laughed things off when they lingered too long in silence. She wasn't reckless. That made everything worse. Recklessness is easy to dismiss. Caution requires intention. The afternoon it almost happened, the campus was unusually quiet. My daughter had gone on a weekend trip with friends. I had no reason to stay, no obligation tying me there. That should have been my cue to leave. Instead, I went to say goodbye. Her office door was closed when I arrived. I knocked. She hesitated before opening it. That hesitation mattered more than anything that followed. "I wasn't expecting you," she said. "I'm leaving tomorrow," I replied. I wanted to say goodbye. She stepped aside to let me in. She did not leave the door open. Nothing dramatic occurred at first. We stood awkwardly, like two people suddenly aware of how small the room was. She crossed her arms, uncrossed them, leaned against the desk. I remained near the door, as if reminding myself that escape was still possible. "I hope your daughter does well," she said softly. "She will," I replied. "Thanks in part to you." Her smile was tired this time. "Real. I don't always know if I'm helping," she admitted. That honesty shifted something fundamental between us. I moved closer, not deliberately, at least that's what I told myself. The space between us narrowed until I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, could smell her perfume, subtle, restrained, nothing like the kind meant to announce desire. "I think you do," I said. "You just don't see it." Her breath caught, just slightly. We stood there, suspended. If anyone had walked in, there would have been nothing to explain. No impropriety, no touch, just two adults standing too close, saying too little. That was the danger of it. She spoke first. "This is not something I do," she said, almost to herself. "I know," I replied. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and something passed between us that required no words. Permission, maybe, or warning. Her hand lifted, stopped halfway, then dropped again. I should have left. Instead, I stayed. We didn't kiss. That matters. What we did instead was worse. We acknowledged what we both wanted and chose not to act on it. She stepped back, shaking her head softly. "You should go." I nodded. Agreed. Moved toward the door. Before I reached it, she spoke again. "I'm glad you came," she said. So was I. And that was how I knew I was already lost. That night, alone again, I didn't sleep. I thought about the way she had looked at me, not hungry, not desperate, but deciding. I understood then that what lay ahead wasn't an accident waiting to happen. It would be a choice. A series of them, carefully made, and never discovered. Absence does not mean escape. Leaving was supposed to fix everything. That's what I told myself as I drove away from the university the next morning, watching the buildings shrink in the rearview mirror. Distance has a way of pretending it's a solution when it's really just a delay. I clung to that illusion the entire drive home. For the first few days, it almost worked. I returned to routines I recognized. Familiar roads, familiar walls, conversations that didn't demand anything from me beyond politeness. I answered calls. I slept. I ate. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. She was there in the quiet moments, in the pauses between tasks, in the way my mind drifted when I wasn't forcing it to stay anchored. I thought about the look she'd given me in her office, the way she'd said "I'm glad you came" without needing to explain what she meant. What unsettled me most wasn't desire. It was how understood I had felt. We didn't communicate at first. That silence felt deliberate, respectful, a mutual understanding that whatever had formed between us needed space to dissolve. I told myself I admired her for that. For her restraint, for her discipline. I didn't yet realize that restraint, once strained, doesn't reset. It tightens, it hums, it waits. The first email came a week later. It was innocuous, professional, a follow-up about my daughter's project. Nothing that couldn't be explained if someone else read it. I replied within minutes. That speed betrayed me. After that, the messages became more frequent, never excessive, never careless. Just enough to keep a connection alive without acknowledging it outright. We spoke about work, about books, about small, safe details of our lives that revealed more than they should have. She never mentioned her husband. I noticed that I never asked. Some truths sit between people like fragile glass, visible, sharp, and better left untouched. My daughter invited me back for a weekend event a month later. I hesitated before agreeing. That hesitation told me everything. I went anyway. Seeing her again was different. The first time, curiosity had carried us. The second time, awareness did. There was no pretending this time, no accidental meetings, no plausible deniability. She met me near the same cafe where we'd first spoken. She was composed, as always. But I noticed the way her posture shifted when she saw me. The subtle inhale, the brief pause before she smiled. "You came back," she said. "So did you," I replied. That earned me a look, amused, knowing, a little dangerous. We walked together, not touching, not rushing. People passed us without noticing anything unusual. That anonymity gave us courage. She asked about my life back home. I gave her edited answers. She spoke about her work with pride, but I could hear the fatigue beneath it now, the weight of responsibility that never quite lifted. "I don't regret my life," she said at one point. I just didn't expect it to feel so contained. I understood that feeling more than I wanted to admit. That evening, she invited me to dinner. Not as colleagues, not as acquaintances, as two adults who had stopped pretending they didn't know what they were doing. We chose a quiet place off campus, neutral ground. The kind of restaurant where conversations blur into background noise and faces remain anonymous. We sat across from each other, hands visible, voices low. Wine loosened nothing we hadn't already decided to loosen. We spoke honestly then, not about us, not directly, but about longing, about time, about the versions of ourselves we'd set aside to keep life orderly. There was intimacy in that honesty that no touch could rival. When her phone buzzed, she didn't check it. That detail mattered. Outside, the night air felt charged. We stood there longer than necessary, neither of us moving toward departure. The city hummed around us, indifferent to the tension unfolding quietly between two people who knew better and were choosing otherwise. "This is complicated," she said. "Yes," I agreed. She waited. "So why does it feel simple?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. "Because we're not lying to each other," I said finally. She exhaled slowly, as if releasing a breath she'd been holding for years. The first time we touched, it was restrained. Her hand brushed mine, not accidentally, not urgently. Just enough contact to confirm what words no longer needed to carry. She didn't pull away, neither did I. That was all it took. What followed wasn't reckless or rushed. It was deliberate, almost reverent, two people acutely aware of the cost and choosing the moment anyway. We crossed the line quietly, without drama, without witnesses. No guilt yet, just clarity. Later, alone again, I expected regret. It didn't come. Instead, there was a calm certainty, unsettling in its steadiness. I understood then that what we had begun wasn't an escape from our lives. It was an addition, carefully hidden, carefully chosen, and once chosen, impossible to undo. By morning, nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. The shape of a double life. Secrecy doesn't arrive all at once. It grows quietly, like a second rhythm beneath your normal life, subtle enough at first that you mistake it for background noise. By the time you recognize it, it's already keeping time with your pulse. After that night, we didn't speak for several days. That wasn't distance. It was discipline. We both understood instinctively that what we had crossed into could not survive recklessness. There were rules now, even if we never stated them out loud. No constant messages. No emotional overflow. No promises. What we shared existed only in carefully chosen moments, insulated from the rest of our lives. That structure made it feel manageable. That was the illusion. When we resumed contact, it was quieter than before. Short messages. Neutral language. Nothing that would raise suspicion if read without context. We had learned each other's rhythms quickly, when it was safe to speak, when silence was wiser. She was always the careful one. I admired that about her. And resented it, just a little. Restraint is admirable until it reminds you of everything you're denying yourself. I returned to the university again under a familiar pretext, another visit, another excuse wrapped neatly around responsibility. This time, my daughter was barely present. Busy, distracted, already halfway into the life she was building beyond me. That hurt more than I expected. It also freed me. We met off campus. Always off campus. Never in places where her name or mine would mean anything to anyone else. Cafes in unfamiliar neighborhoods. Hotels that catered to anonymity rather than luxury. Spaces designed for people who didn't want to be remembered. What we did in those places was never rushed. That mattered to her. She liked control, not dominance, but intention. Every choice deliberate. Every boundary crossed because she decided it was worth crossing. I let her lead. That, more than anything, changed me. She was different with me than she was with the world. Not louder, not younger, just unguarded. She spoke about the weight of expectations, about being the composed wife, the respected academic, the reliable presence everyone leaned on. She spoke about how exhausting it was to always be the person others depended on. With you, she said once, I don't have to carry anything. That sentence stayed with me. It was heavier than any declaration of love could have been. I noticed changes in myself too. I became more patient, more attentive, more alive in ways that had nothing to do with physical intimacy. I listened better, not just to her, but to everyone. It was as if some dormant part of me had been awakened, and now demanded to be fed. That scared me, because awakenings don't come with off switches. We never spoke about the future. That silence was intentional. The present was dangerous enough. But there were moments, fleeting, unspoken, when the question lingered between us. In the way she lingered after goodbye. In the way I found myself memorizing details I had no right to remember. She never said she would leave her husband. I never asked her to. That mutual restraint felt like integrity. It was also avoidance. The risk was no longer being discovered. The risk was becoming indispensable to each other. I felt it the first time she cancelled a meeting with me, not out of guilt or fear, but obligation. Something at home required her attention. She apologized, genuinely. I told her I understood. I did, but understanding didn't dull the disappointment. That's when I realized how deeply I was entangled, not just in her presence, but in her absence. She noticed the shift before I did. You're thinking too far ahead, she said gently one evening, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass rather than reaching for me. I'm not thinking at all, I replied. She smiled at that, sad, knowing. That's worse. Despite everything, she remained married. Comfortably, publicly, untouched by suspicion. That anonymity protected her. It also isolated her. There were moments when I saw the cost of it in her eyes. The effort it took to compartmentalize, to be two versions of herself without letting them collide. I never asked her if it was worth it. I was afraid of the answer. What we had was not reckless passion. It was deliberate intimacy, and deliberate things are harder to escape. By the time I realized how deeply this had reshaped me, it was already woven into my sense of self, not as a secret thrill, but as a quiet truth I carried everywhere. I only came to visit my school daughter. That was the story I still told. But the truth was something else entirely. I had come to remember who I was before life taught me how to settle. And now, there was no unlearning that. When silence stops being enough, there comes a point when secrecy stops feeling protective and starts feeling suffocating. I didn't recognize the moment immediately. Looking back, I see now that it wasn't a single event, but a slow accumulation, small fractures spreading through a structure that had once felt solid. We had built something careful, intentional, restrained. But even careful things erode under pressure. The pressure wasn't fear, it was longing. She became quieter, not distant, that would have been easier to interpret, but inward. Present in body, measured in speech. I noticed it first in the pauses she took before answering questions she once answered freely. In the way she sometimes looked past me instead of at me, as though already calculating what part of herself she could afford to give away that day. I asked her once if everything was all right. She smiled and said yes. That was the first time I didn't believe her. We were together less often. Not because she wanted distance, but because life demanded her attention in ways our arrangement could not compete with. Meetings ran late. Family obligations multiplied. Her availability shrank into narrow windows that felt borrowed rather than chosen. I told myself to be patient. I had never been patient in my life. The imbalance crept in quietly. I began waiting for messages that didn't come when I expected them. Rereading conversations for tone. Wondering whether silence meant caution, exhaustion, or something else entirely. I hated that version of myself, the one measuring his worth in response times and half-written sentences. She noticed. "You're carrying this differently now," she said one evening, her voice careful. "Carrying what?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. "That thing you said you didn't come here looking for." I laughed then. It was the wrong reaction. "I didn't come here looking for anything," I said. "This just happened." She studied me for a long moment. "That's not true anymore," she said softly. Her words unsettled me because they were precise. The truth was, I had started building my days around the possibility of her. Not the certainty, that would have been foolish, but the hope. And hope is dangerous when it has nowhere to go. I thought about her when I shouldn't have. Compared moments with her to moments without. Measured the rest of my life against a connection that existed only in fragments. That wasn't fair to her. It wasn't fair to me. But fairness had stopped being the governing principle a long time ago. She remained married, unquestioned, unsuspected. I saw glimpses of that life only indirectly, in the way she spoke about her schedule, in the subtle shifts of her demeanor after weekends away. She never complained, never confided details. That discretion had once felt respectful. Now, it felt like a wall. I wanted to know more. That wanting frightened me. One afternoon, she cancelled on me at the last minute. No explanation, just an apology and a promise to reschedule. I replied politely. Then I sat with the disappointment longer than I should have. It wasn't anger I felt. It was grief. And grief has no place in an arrangement built on silence. We spoke about it later, carefully, indirectly, the way people do when they're afraid to name the real problem. "I can't give you more than this," she said, her eyes steady but tired. "I'm not asking for more," I replied. We both knew that wasn't entirely true. She reached for my hand then, briefly, deliberately, as if grounding herself. "This works because it's contained," she said. "The moment it wants more space, it collapses." I understood that intellectually. Emotion doesn't respect structure. The irony was cruel. What we had built to avoid disruption was now disrupting me from the inside out. I found myself restless, distracted, impatient with a life that had once felt sufficient. I questioned choices I had never doubted before, not because I wanted to change them, but because they now existed alongside something that refused to stay small. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Neither was I. That made it harder. The night it finally surfaced between us, there was no argument. Just honesty. "I think about you even when I shouldn't," I admitted quietly. She didn't flinch. "I know," she said. "I do too." That admission landed heavier than rejection would have. "But I can't live two full lives," she continued. "One of them has to stay partial." I nodded. So did mine. After that, something shifted. Not an ending. Not a withdrawal. A recalibration. We became more cautious, not with discovery, but with each other. Conversations grew lighter, time together shortened, the intensity softened into something more manageable, more survivable. It felt like maturity. It also felt like loss. I began to understand then that the greatest risk we faced had never been exposure. It was attachment. Because attachment asks questions secrecy cannot answer. And once those questions are asked, silence stops being protection. It becomes punishment. I only came to visit my school daughter. That was still the story. But the truth had grown heavier, not because of what we had done, but because of what we now had to contain. And containment, I was learning, has limits. What remains when nothing is taken? Endings rarely announce themselves. They arrive disguised as decisions that feel reasonable in the moment, choices framed as restraint, responsibility, maturity. You only recognize them as endings later, when you realize something has stopped asking for space in your life. By the time I understood that this was where we were headed, it was already too late to pretend otherwise. We didn't see each other for a while. Not because we had agreed to stop, there was never such a conversation, but because life made the decision for us. Her calendar filled, mine did too. The narrow windows we once slipped through quietly closed, one by one, without ceremony. There were still messages, fewer, shorter, warmer in tone than in content. Affection stripped of appetite, that hurt more than distance ever had. I noticed how easily routine reclaimed its territory once I stopped resisting it. Days passed without expectation. Evenings no longer carried anticipation. The quiet in my life returned to its familiar shape, steady, predictable, manageable. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. Not because she was gone, she wasn't, not entirely, but because the version of myself she had awakened no longer had anywhere to exist. We met one last time without planning it. That detail matters. It happened on campus, in broad daylight, surrounded by people who had no idea what had passed between us. She was walking toward a lecture hall, papers tucked against her chest, expression focused and composed. She looked exactly like the woman everyone knew. When she saw me, she stopped. Just for a moment. I didn't know you were here, she said. I didn't know I would be, I replied. That felt honest. We stood there, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. There was no tension this time. Just recognition. She looked well, tired, maybe, but settled in a way I hadn't seen before. I wondered if she felt lighter now, or if the weight had simply redistributed itself into something she could carry without thinking. I hope you're all right, I said. She smiled, not guarded, not wistful. I am, she said. I really am. I believed her. That was both comforting and painful. She hesitated, then spoke again. I don't regret it, she said quietly. But I can't revisit it either. I nodded. I wouldn't want you to, I replied. And I meant it. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. What we had shared no longer required confirmation. It existed as memory now, complete, intact, untouchable. Something that would not grow or demand or threaten. Just something that had been. After she walked away, I didn't follow. That mattered more than anything else in this story. For the first time since the beginning, I let the moment pass without trying to hold on to it. I left the university that afternoon without looking back. The campus felt smaller than it had before, its edges clearer, its pull diminished. It no longer represented possibility. It was just a place where something meaningful had occurred, and ended. My daughter hugged me before I left, unaware of what had unfolded around her life like a parallel world she would never enter. I was grateful for that ignorance. It protected her from complications she didn't deserve. Some stories are meant to remain isolated. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes in myself. I was calmer, more deliberate, less prone to distraction. I carried a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with conquest or secrecy and everything to do with understanding myself more clearly than I had before. I had learned something uncomfortable but valuable. Wanting more doesn't always mean taking more. Sometimes it means knowing when not to. She remained anonymous. That was important to both of us. No one ever knew what she had chosen, or what she had resisted. No one questioned her marriage, her integrity, her life. From the outside, Nothing about her story changed. From the inside, I imagine everything did. Just as it had for me. I only came to visit my school daughter. That will always be the version of the story I tell. But the truth, the real truth, is simpler and harder to explain. I came face to face with a version of myself I thought I had outgrown. And I left knowing that growth doesn't erase desire. It teaches you how to live with it. Quietly, responsibly, and without witnesses. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for mature audiences. All characters, events, and situations are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons or real events is purely coincidental. This narrative explores adult emotions, secrecy, desire, restraint, and personal choice. It is not intended to promote infidelity, harm, or immoral behavior, but to reflect the complexity of human decisions and the silent consequences that follow them. Viewer discretion is advised. Some stories don't end with exposure. They end with silence. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, mature stories told without judgment. Because not every secret is meant to be discovered. Some are meant to be understood.